The war had ended, but the sky above the Dragon Empire was still burned red. Ash drifted through the air like dying snowflakes, and the ground still smelled of smoke and blood. In the shattered city of Varzel, where golden towers once touched the stars, the Dragon Empress lay weak upon her throne. Her wings were folded tight against her back, and her scales, once gleaming like molten fire, had dulled to a sickly shade of gray. Her name was Sarathia, known across worlds as the Flame of Stars, the ruler who burned entire fleets when they dared cross her borders, but now her fire was fading. The healers of her empire had tried every ancient remedy, every sacred ritual, and every forbidden poison meant to burn the sickness out. Nothing worked. The infection spread through her veins like black lightning, crawling beneath her scales, eating her strength day by day. The court whispered that the gods had cursed her, that no one could save the Dragon Empress from the punishment of her own war. She sat in silence, staring at the smoke curling through the broken windows of her palace. Once those windows opened to the songs of dragons and the hum of starships. Now there was only wind and ruin. Every sound reminded her of what she had lost, the soldiers who burned for her glory, the civilians who screamed her name in both worship and fear. She clenched her claws and whispered to herself, "All victories taste like ash." A servant entered the throne hall, bowing so low his horns touched the floor. "Your Majesty," he said, trembling. "There is someone outside the gates brought in by the border guards. He claims he can help you." The Empress turned her head slowly, her golden eyes dim and hollow. "Another healer?" she asked weakly. "Another? Fool who thinks dragonfire can be cured with herbs and prayers?" The servant hesitated. "He is. Not one of us, Majesty. He is a human." The air in the hall grew heavy. Every dragon guard tightened their grip on their spears, their scales bristling in anger. Humans, the destroyers of worlds, the ones who had once rained metal storms upon their cities. The Empress's eyes narrowed. "A human dares to step into my palace?" The servant swallowed hard. "He says he is a doctor, a healer of his kind. He begged us not to kill him. He only wants to try to help." The Empress leaned back, feeling pain pulse through her chest. She should have ordered his execution, should have burned him alive just to remind her empire that dragons do not beg humans for mercy. But the fire inside her heart flickered weakly, and something colder, something she hated, spoke inside her mind. What if he can help? "Bring him," she said quietly. The guards looked at one another in disbelief. "Your Majesty, he could be a spy," one protested. "He could have come to finish what his armies started." The Empress's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "If he kills me, then let him. If he saves me, then perhaps the stars have not forsaken us yet." And with that, she closed her eyes, waiting. Outside the great hall, the gates of Blackstone groaned open. A group of dragon soldiers dragged in a thin, pale man dressed in torn, soot-stained clothing. His eyes were calm, though his face was covered in dirt and exhaustion. He looked nothing like a warrior, nothing like the monsters her people described in their stories. He carried a small metal case, clutched tightly in his shaking hands when he was forced to kneel before her. The dragons around him hissed in disgust, their teeth gleaming. But the Empress raised one claw, silencing them all. "What is your name, human?" she asked, her voice low and tired. "Elias Crane," he replied, his tone respectful but steady. "Dr. Elias Crane, from Earth. Do you know who I am?" "Yes," he said, meeting her gaze. "You're the Dragon Empress who destroyed the human fleet at Vega and saved her people by burning half the sky." There was no fear in his voice, only quiet truth. The court gasped, expecting the Empress to strike him down for his boldness, but instead she let out a hoarse laugh that turned into a cough. "You speak as if you admire me," she said. "I don't," he answered honestly. "But I understand what it means to fight for survival." The Empress studied him, searching for deceit, but found none. His heartbeat was steady, his scent was clean of lies. This human stood in a hall of monsters, and yet his eyes did not tremble. "You believe you can heal me?" she asked finally. He opened his case, revealing strange silver instruments, vials of shimmering blue liquid, and something that hummed softly with light. "I don't know if I can," he said, "but I'll try, and I'll need quiet, no fire, no interruptions." The dragons around her roared in protest. "Blasphemy!" one shouted. "He dares command our Empress!" But before anyone could move, the Empress raised her hand. "Enough," she whispered, her voice weak but firm. For the first time since the war, her eyes softened. "Doctor," she said, "do what you must. But if you fail, I will burn your world myself." The human nodded. "Then I'll make sure I don't fail." As he stepped closer, the court held its breath. The human's fingers brushed the Empress's scales and a soft blue glow spread from his touch. The black infection pulsed, then flickered, as if retreating from the light. The Empress gasped, not in pain, but in shock. For the first time in months, the fire in her heart didn't hurt. It burned warm, gentle, and alive. And as the guards looked on in disbelief, the Dragon Empress whispered, "Perhaps the stars sent you after all, human." Above the palace, the burned sky began to clear. For the first time in years, light broke through the clouds and the stars shone faintly. The Dragon Empress closed her eyes, letting the warmth touch her face. And far below, the human doctor smiled quietly to himself, knowing that something far greater than medicine had begun that day. A legend was being born beneath the burned sky. The next morning, the palace was silent. No roars, no footsteps, not even the sound of servants whispering in the halls. Every dragon in the royal court waited in fear and disbelief, because deep inside the throne chamber the human doctor was still alive. He had spent the whole night beside the Dragon Empress, touching her scales with glowing hands and strange tools that hissed and hummed softly. No one dared interrupt, not even the guards who stood outside the door, afraid of the sounds they heard: low moans of pain, bursts of crackling fire, and the rhythmic beeping of his odd machine. When the first light of dawn crept through the broken windows, Dr. Elias Crane stood up at last. His face was pale, his shirt soaked in sweat, his hands trembling slightly. The Empress lay still, breathing evenly for the first time in months. Her chest no longer glowed with the dark veins of infection. Only faint silver scars remained under her scales. He exhaled in relief, whispering to himself, "It's working." The guards opened the doors cautiously, their golden eyes glaring at the human. He did not bow, nor did he speak right away. He simply packed his instruments back into his silver case, moving with calm precision. "She will wake soon," he said quietly. "But she must rest. Her body is rebuilding itself. Do not disturb her." The guards hesitated, uncertain how to react to his tone. Humans were supposed to beg, to tremble, to kneel, but this one gave orders. One guard hissed angrily, "You speak as if you command us, creature." Elias looked at him, his tired eyes unshaken. "If you want her to live, you'll do exactly as I say." The words struck harder than any blade, and for a long moment no one moved. Inside the chamber the Empress stirred. Her voice, weak but steady, filled the air. "Let him speak." The guards froze instantly, heads bowed. She slowly rose from her throne, her wings flexing, sending faint sparks into the air. Her scales caught the morning light, glowing faintly gold again. It was the first time she had stood on her own in nearly half a year. Her golden eyes locked on the human, studying him as if seeing him for the first time. "You did not ask for reward, or fear punishment," she said softly. "Why?" Elias looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Because healing someone is not a favor," he said. "It's my duty." Her lips curved faintly, the closest thing to a smile her people had ever seen from her. "Your duty?" she repeated, her voice echoing in the high hall. "To heal dragons?" "My duty," he said firmly. "To heal anyone who suffers, dragon or human, ruler or child. It doesn't matter to me." The words unsettled the court more than they would ever admit. No one had spoken to the Empress like that, not even her generals. And yet she did not strike him down. Instead, she said quietly, "You speak boldly for a fragile creature." "Fragile things," Elias replied, "often survive because they learn how to fix what breaks." A silence fell, heavy but not hostile. The Empress sat again, her claws tapping against the throne's edge. "What do you need to finish your work?" she asked. "Clean water, soft light, and time," Elias said. "And fewer people shouting at me." The corners of her lips lifted again. "You dare give orders to your Empress?" He gave a small shrug. "Only if you want to live." A few dragons gasped, but the Empress waved them off with a flick of her tail. "Then you shall have what you need," she said. "The royal bathhouse will be yours and any tool you require." From that day forward, the palace changed. The human doctor was given a chamber near the throne room, guarded, yes, but untouched. He worked day and night, mixing medicines, heating strange liquids, and adjusting his glowing devices. The Empress would visit quietly, sometimes just to watch. He never bowed, never sought favor, and never lied. When she asked questions about his world, he answered plainly. He spoke of Earth, of rain that fell from gray skies, of cities that touched clouds, of wars that ended not with fire but with mercy. At first, she thought he spoke in riddles, but slowly she began to see the truth. Humans were not only destroyers, they were survivors, dreamers, healers. She found herself wondering what their hearts were made of. Soft like their skin, or strong like their will. One evening, while the stars burned red outside, Elias entered her private garden. He found her sitting beside a pool, staring into the reflection of her own weary face. "You shouldn't move this much," he said, kneeling to check her pulse. She turned toward him, her golden eyes narrowing. "Do humans always scold their rulers?" "Only when they ignore advice," he said with a faint smile. Something strange flickered in her chest. Warmth, faint but unfamiliar. "Tell me, doctor," she said after a while, her voice quieter. "Why did you really come here? To heal me or to study us?" He stopped moving, the reflection of starlight flickering across his face. "I came because I heard the Dragon Empress was dying," he said simply, "and I couldn't let another life end when I could help." "But we destroyed your fleets," she said. "We killed your kind." "Yes," he replied softly. "And yet, here I am." The words struck her harder than any weapon in that moment. She saw something she had never understood. This small, fragile being before her was not weak, not at all. He carried the weight of loss but still chose compassion over vengeance. That night the Empress could not sleep. His words replayed in her mind again and again. A heartbeat is a heartbeat, no matter the shape of the chest. The next morning, the Empress woke to find him gone from his chambers. Guards panicked, fearing he had fled. But when she followed the faint glow of his light down the hall, she found him in the lower quarters. He was kneeling beside injured dragon children, orphans from her own wars. Healing them quietly, one by one, the Empress stood in the shadows. Watching, no one had ordered him to do this. No one had offered him gold or glory. He did it because he cared. A single tear rolled down her scaled cheek, hissing as it touched the stone floor. For the first time in her long, merciless reign, the Dragon Empress felt something she had forgotten long ago. Shame, not for losing the war, not for her pain, but for never realizing that compassion could be stronger than fire. She turned away before he could see her, her heart heavy yet strangely light. The human's touch had not only healed her body, it had begun to heal something deeper, the wounds in her soul. And as she walked back to her throne, the echo of his soft, human heartbeat stayed in her mind. Steady and warm, the Empress of Dragons, once feared by all, began to wonder if mercy could burn brighter than flame. The palace of the Dragon Empress no longer sounded the same. For the first time in centuries, there was laughter in the healer's wing. The human doctor, Elias Crane, had done what none of the royal healers could. He restored warmth to the Empress's veins and light to her scales. But not everyone saw it as a miracle. To many in the Dragon Court, it was blasphemy. A human, the same kind who once burned their skies, was now walking freely through the golden halls of the Empire. speaking to their empress as an equal to them. It was an insult that dripped like poison. That morning the Grand Council assembled. Hundreds of dragon nobles filled the obsidian chamber, their scaled bodies glowing in shades of red, gold, and emerald. Their voices rose in angry hisses and growls, echoing through the marble halls. "The Empress has been deceived," one thundered. "This human is no healer. He's a spy, a serpent hiding under soft skin. His hands carry human filth," another hissed. "He seeks to weaken her so his kind can finish what they started." Their words struck like arrows, feeding the fire of doubt that spread among the gathered dragons. At the center of the chamber stood the Empress, silent and watchful, her golden eyes unreadable. She listened to the accusations, her claws drumming softly on the armrest of her throne. When they finished, she rose slowly, her great wings unfurling behind her like curtains of flame. The room fell silent at once, her voice cut through the air. "Calm but heavy with power, are you finished?" she asked. Her generals bowed, their tails twitching. "Majesty, we only speak out of loyalty. This human cannot be trusted. Loyalty," she repeated softly, "is not built on fear." The council shifted uneasily. The Empress continued, "When the doctors of our kind failed me, when your rituals failed me, when even your prayers failed me, who stood beside me? Who worked while you all argued over who would take my throne?" Her eyes blazed now, golden light rippling across the room. "It was the human," she said, her voice rising. "He healed me when you could not. He touched my scales without trembling. He faced death without flinching. Tell me, which of you can claim the same?" A murmur spread among the nobles, but one stepped forward. Lord Vraxen, an ancient dragon whose scars told of 100 battles. He bowed low, but his tone was sharp. "Majesty, it is not his courage we question, but his purpose. Humans are cunning. They heal with one hand and destroy with the other. What if this healing is a trap? What if he weakens you from within?" The Empress's eyes flicked toward him, their fire dimming for just a breath. She knew his fear was not entirely wrong. Trust was not easily given between enemies. But before she could reply, the great doors of the chamber opened, and the very man they spoke of entered. Dr. Elias Crane walked into the council hall without hesitation. His coat was stained with soot and dried blood, not his own, but from the wounded dragons he had treated that morning. He carried no weapon, only his silver case, and yet the entire council recoiled as if a predator had entered. He bowed slightly, his voice even. "You summoned me?" Vraxen snarled. "You dare speak without permission?" Elias's calm gaze met his. "If the Empress wanted me silent, she'd have said so." The dragons roared in outrage, the heat in the hall rising so fast that the marble floor cracked beneath their claws. But the Empress raised her tail and slammed it once against the ground. The sound thundered through the chamber. "Enough," she commanded. Silence fell instantly. She turned to Elias, her tone measured. "The council fears your intentions. Tell them what you seek, human." Elias met her gaze, steady as always. "What I seek," he said quietly. "To heal, nothing more. You're dragons, powerful beyond measure, but your bodies still bleed. Your hearts still beat. Disease doesn't care about your crowns or your pride." He opened his case, revealing the strange blue light that pulsed like a living flame. "I treat wounds, that's all. I don't care if the skin is scaled or soft. I don't care who started which war." He looked around the chamber, his voice gaining strength. "Because I've seen what hate does. It kills slower than a sword, but deeper than poison." The room fell deathly still. Even Lord Vraxen, whose tail had been coiled to strike, stopped moving. The Empress watched the human carefully. His words carried no fear, no deceit, only a kind of weary truth that disarmed even her. "You speak of mercy," she said, "but mercy has no place in war." Elias nodded. "That's why I'm not a soldier." Those words hit her like a spark all her life. The Empress had been surrounded by warriors, flatterers, killers. Never someone who spoke with no motive but conviction. She looked at her council, their faces twisted with pride and rage, and suddenly they seemed small. "Leave us," she said quietly. "Majesty, now!" Her voice deepened, flames rippling along her wings. "Before I show you what true wrath looks like." The council scattered, their anger swallowed by fear, leaving the Empress alone with the human. For a long moment neither spoke. Elias stood there calm, while she looked down from her golden throne, the glow of her eyes dimming to a soft amber. "You defied them," she said finally. "You risked death just to speak truth. He smiled faintly. I've been risking death since the day I chose to heal instead of fight. That made her pause, her claws curling slightly. You could have saved yourself by flattering me, she said. I don't treat egos, he replied softly. Only wounds. A silence stretched between them, warm this time. The Empress looked away, hiding the flicker of emotion that threatened her composure. You are reckless, human, she said at last, but perhaps that's what this empire needs. Then she rose, her massive wings casting golden light over him. From this day forward, no one shall question your place here. You are under my protection. Elias bowed slightly. And under your orders, I'll continue my work. Her eyes softened. Good, then heal my people as you healed me. Outside, the dragons whispered that day that the Empress had chosen a human over her own kind, but those who looked closer saw something else. The fire in her eyes burned steadier, not colder, and for the first time since the war ended, the great halls of the Dragon Empire glowed not from anger or flame, but from hope. And in that quiet light, the legend of the human doctor began to spread beyond the stars, carried on the tongues of both dragon and man alike. The days that followed changed everything inside the Dragon Palace. The human doctor no longer walked as a prisoner or an outsider. He moved through the golden halls with quiet confidence, carrying his small silver case like a weapon of peace. The guards, once suspicious, now stepped aside without question. They had seen what he did, how his strange, glowing hands healed the Empress's cursed veins when every dragon healer had failed. Still, whispers followed him everywhere. Some called him the Deathless Healer. Others called him the Empress's pet. But Elias Crane didn't care. He had only one focus, and his patience. The Dragon Empress Sarathia watched him from afar more often than she admitted. Her throne overlooked the lower courtyards, where he worked tirelessly from dawn until the moons rose. He was not like the warrior she commanded. He did not roar or fight for dominance. He listened, spoke softly, and touched pain without fear. Sometimes she caught herself wondering how a creature so small could hold such unshakable strength. The more she watched, the more she realized it wasn't power that moved him. It was compassion, and that to her was more dangerous than any sword. One evening, the Empress descended quietly from her throne, her long wings folded close to her back. She dismissed her guards with a wave and walked the marble corridors alone, her claws clicking softly against the floor. The scent of strange herbs and warm light guided her steps toward the lower chambers. There she found Elias kneeling beside a wounded dragon child. The boy whimpered as Elias cleaned a deep cut on his wing. It'll sting, Elias said gently, but it'll heal clean. I promise. The child nodded, biting back a cry. When Elias pressed his glowing tool against the wound, blue light spread through the boy's scales and the bleeding stopped instantly. The Empress blinked. She had seen dragons use flame to seal wounds, brutal and painful, but this was different. The human's light healed without burning, without cruelty. When he finished, he ruffled the boy's horn softly and smiled. There, he said, you'll be flying again soon. The boy's eyes lit up with gratitude. Thank you, sir. Just don't crash next time, Elias said, half smiling. The Empress stepped forward, her shadow spilling across the room. The child froze instantly, eyes wide. Your Majesty, he squeaked, bowing so low his horn scraped the floor. Elias turned, unafraid, wiping his hands on a cloth. Majesty, he greeted calmly, you should be resting. Her wings twitched slightly. No one had ever spoken to her that way. I rest when I choose, she said, her voice steady but quiet. You heal children now? They were injured in one of your border raids, he replied evenly. I can't undo what happened, but I can stop them from suffering for it. Her gaze softened for just a moment before she hid it behind her regal mask. They are dragon spawn of enemy clans, she said, testing him. Their pain is not your concern. Elias's eyes flickered with something that wasn't fear. It was defiance. Quiet but immovable. Pain is pain, he said. It doesn't change its color because of who caused it. His words hit her like a blow. She wanted to argue, to remind him that war required cruelty, that mercy was weakness, but instead, she found herself staring at the boy's small, trembling form. For the first time, she saw not an enemy's child, but just a child. Go, she told the boy gently. Your wings will heal. He ran out, whispering thanks in a voice full of wonder. When they were alone, the Empress turned back to Elias, her tone low. You risk much, human, she said. My council already despises you. Healing the young of enemy clans will not help your case. I didn't come here to win their favor, Elias replied. I came here to stop watching lives burn. She tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she could not solve. Do all humans speak with such stubborn hearts? She asked. He smiled faintly. Only the ones who've lost too much. Something in her chest twisted at that. She could see it in his eyes, a story he didn't tell, a shadow of pain buried deep behind his calm face. Who did you lose? She asked softly. He hesitated, then looked away. Everyone. The silence that followed was heavy. She felt something unfamiliar. Guilt, not for what she'd done, but for what her kind had taken from his. And yet here he stood, healing her people, mending her empire, asking for nothing. It was a mercy she could neither understand nor forget. Later that night, the Empress returned to her chambers, unable to sleep. The stars outside her window glowed red and blue across the void. She thought of the human's hands, steady, glowing, gentle, and how they had brought warmth back to her dying body. For the first time, she began to question everything she had believed about strength. Maybe strength wasn't about fire or fear. Maybe it was about enduring pain and still choosing kindness. In the following days, she found herself visiting him more often, sometimes in silence, sometimes in conversation. He would teach her strange human ideas: cleanliness, sterility, medicine. She would laugh softly when he scolded her for entering unannounced. He would remind her not to lift heavy things. She would remind him that she could crush mountains. Their words clashed and danced like fire and rain, and somewhere between them a bond began to grow. But not everyone approved. From the shadows, her generals watched with growing fury. They whispered among themselves, that the Empress was changing, that the human's soft voice was dulling her flame. They did not see healing in his touch. They saw weakness spreading through their empire, and though she did not know it yet, dark plans were already forming behind her throne. The very court that once feared her was now preparing to challenge her, all because a human had taught her to see the world not through pride, but through compassion. That night, as Elias worked late in his chamber, the Empress stood unseen beyond the doorway. She watched him bend over a map of veins and muscles, murmuring to himself about ways to treat dragon blood infections. For the first time in centuries, she did not see herself as a ruler or a weapon. She saw herself as a living being, flawed, fragile, and capable of change. The mighty Dragon Empress, who once ruled with terror, realized something both terrifying and beautiful, that her heart, long frozen by power and war, had begun to beat again, and it beat because of a human outside. The stars pulsed softly in the burned sky. The universe itself seemed to listen, holding its breath. For the fate of dragons and humans alike was shifting quietly in that moment. Not through fire, not through conquest, but through one man's gentle touch, and the watchful heart of an empress who was learning, at last, to feel. The days of quiet healing could not last forever. Peace in the Dragon Empire was as fragile as glass, and though the Empress and the human doctor worked side by side, the whispers in the shadows began to take root. Some dragons spoke softly of admiration, of how the human's strange light had restored their ruler and saved dragon hatchlings from death. But others spoke of corruption, of weakness, of betrayal. They claimed the Empress had fallen under a human spell, that his soft hands and gentle voice were only masks for a darker purpose. The Empress Sarathia ignored the rumors at first. She had grown used to the claws of envy that came with power. But lately, she noticed the glances of her generals, not of loyalty but of suspicion. Even her most trusted advisor, Lord Vraxon, no longer met her eyes without hesitation. The tension crept through the palace like smoke, unseen but choking. One morning, she summoned Elias to her private chamber. The room was dimly lit, filled with the soft glow of hovering amber crystals. He entered quietly, carrying his silver case as always. She watched him as he cleaned his instruments. His movements slow and precise. "Doctor," she said finally, "you've been healing my people, my soldiers, even the young of enemy clans." "Yes," he said without looking up. "Their wounds don't care about allegiance." A faint smile crossed her lips, but it faded quickly. "Do you know what they say about you?" she asked, her tone distant. "That I'm too stubborn to die?" he replied, half smiling. She didn't return the smile. "They say you plan to destroy me from within." He froze, the metal tool in his hand catching the light. His expression didn't shift to fear, Only quiet sadness. I expected that, he said, setting the tool down. That always happens eventually. Her voice softened. What do you mean? He leaned against the table, his eyes tired but honest. I've been to 10 worlds, Empress, he said. I've treated soldiers, slaves, and kings. And every time when people see something they don't understand, they turn it into something to hate. She studied him for a long moment, her sharp gaze searching his face. You do not deny it, she said quietly. You do not try to defend yourself. What would be the point? He replied, if you don't believe what you've seen with your own eyes, no words will change your mind. The Empress's wing shifted slightly, her shadow stretching across the room. I have seen your work, she said. I have felt your light in my blood, seen it heal wounds no magic could touch, but still a question burns in me. He looked up, meeting her golden gaze without fear. Why? She asked, her voice trembling just slightly. Why did you come here? You could have stayed safe on your world, far from ours. Why help the one who burned your fleets and crushed your kind beneath her claws? The air in the chamber grew still, heavy with something unspoken. For a long time, Elias didn't answer. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of cloth, faded and frayed when he unfolded it. The Empress saw what it was, a patch from a military uniform, marked with the insignia of Earth's old defense force. This belonged to my sister, he said softly. She died in your war. The Empress's eyes widened, the glow in them dimming. Elias continued. She wasn't a soldier. She was a medic. She tried to save lives on both sides during the final siege. A dragon strike hit the camp. She burned before she could finish her work. The Empress's claws clenched against the stone armrest, cracks forming beneath her grip. The weight of guilt she had long buried rose like fire in her throat. And still, you came here? She whispered, her voice breaking. I came here because of her, he said. Because she believed even monsters could be saved. Because she refused to see enemies, to only people in pain. I couldn't save her, but I could honor her. He took a slow breath. And when I heard that the Dragon Empress was dying, I saw a chance, not to destroy you, but to finish what she started. Silence filled the room. Thick and trembling, the Empress turned away, her wings folding tightly around her. You shame me, human, she said at last. For years I told myself my war was justified, that your kind would have destroyed us first if I hadn't struck. But hearing you now, I wonder if I ever understood what victory cost. He shook his head gently. It's not shame I want for you. Then what do you want? She asked. He looked up at her, his voice steady. For you to heal, truly heal. Not just your body, but what your fire broke. Her breath caught. For the first time in centuries, she felt small, not as a ruler, but as a person. And though she was surrounded by wealth and worship, it was a human's words that made her feel seen. Before she could reply, the door burst open. Lord Vraxen stormed in, flanked by guards. Majesty, he shouted, his claws sparking. Step away from him. We have proof of his deceit. The Empress's eyes flared in fury. You dare interrupt? But Vraxen held up a crystal shard glowing red. This was found in his quarters, he said triumphantly. A communication beacon, human technology. It sends signals to space. To your enemies! The guards roared, weapons drawn. Elias stood still, calm even as spears of flame surrounded him. That's a transmitter, he said quietly. I use it to monitor radiation from your healing chambers and not to send messages. Lies. Vraxen spat. He's been feeding our secrets to the humans. Enough! The Empress roared, her voice shaking the room. The guards froze, fire sputtering out instantly. She turned to Elias, her heart torn between rage and doubt. Can you prove this? She asked. Elias looked straight into her eyes. No, he said, you'll have to trust me. For the first time, the Empress hesitated. The court's eyes were upon her, waiting, judging, whispering if she defended him now. They would call her weak if she condemned him. She might lose the one soul who had ever shown her true mercy. Her claws trembled slightly and her voice lowered. Take him to the lower halls, she said finally. Do not harm him. I will decide his fate when I know the truth. Vraxen bowed with satisfaction as the guards led Elias away in chains. The Empress stood alone in the silence that followed. The same silence she once thought was peace. But now it only felt like loss outside her window. The stars flickered faintly, as if dimmed by sorrow. The human doctor who healed her body was now branded a traitor. And in her heart, Sarathia knew something deeper than fear had begun to burn. It was the feeling she had buried since the war, the painful, dangerous truth that sometimes trust cost more than war ever did. The dungeons of the Dragon Palace were carved deep into the black mountains beneath the Empire. They were not built for comfort. They were built for silence, for fear, for forgetting down there. In a chamber of obsidian and chains, the human doctor sat alone. The faint glow from his broken tools cast blue shadows on the stone walls. His hands were bruised from the guard's roughness, but his eyes remained calm. He had known this would happen. He always knew that kindness was a fragile bridge, and fragile bridges often broke under the weight of suspicion. Above him in the high throne chamber, the Dragon Empress stood before the great fire pit of judgment. Her court had gathered, demanding a verdict. Lord Vraxen stood proudly beside the glowing shard he had presented as evidence. "The human sends signals to his world," he said, his voice echoing. "He is not a healer. He is a spy, a liar who has poisoned our ruler's heart," the dragons murmured, their tails thrashing, their wings scraping the marble floors. "Enough," the Empress said quietly, her wings spreading. "You will not speak for me." Her voice silenced the hall, but not the storm inside her. She could feel the ache in her chest, not from her old wound, but from doubt. Elias's face haunted her. His words, his calm eyes, his promise to heal not for power, but for peace. Could such a man betray her? She didn't want to believe it, and yet every voice around her whispered that he had. She raised her head high, her voice breaking through the tension. "Bring him," she ordered. Moments later, the heavy doors opened. Elias Crane was led into the hall by 2 guards, his hands bound with glowing chains. He looked thinner, his face shadowed with exhaustion, but his gaze was steady, his spirit unbroken. The Empress watched him closely. Even now he didn't beg for mercy, didn't curse her, didn't even look away. He simply waited, as though the weight of the galaxy rested on patience alone. "Human," she said, her tone sharp, "they say you betrayed me, that you sent word to your world of my weakness, of my wounds, of our empire's fall." Elias looked up. "If I had wanted to destroy you, I would have let you die the day I arrived." The words hung in the air like lightning. The council roared in outrage, but the Empress silenced them with a single glare. "You speak boldly for one in chains," she said. He gave a small, tired smile. "I speak boldly because truth doesn't need armor." Her heart trembled, but she forced her face to stay cold. "Then tell me this," she said, stepping closer. "Why should I believe you now when even your tools lie against you?" Elias lowered his head slightly, then met her gaze again. "Because I didn't come here to survive," he said softly. "I came here to save a life, even if it cost me mine." For a long moment, no one moved. The Empress's claws tightened on her throne, the fire behind her crackling louder. She wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous, and yet deep within her, she felt the same warmth she had felt the night he touched her dying scales, the same strange light that had soothed her pain when her own kind failed her. But before she could speak, chaos erupted. A dragon messenger stormed into the chamber, his scales scorched, his breathing ragged. "Majesty," he cried, bowing low. "There's been an attack. The poison of the Shadow Clans has been released into the royal wells." The court gasped, panic spreading like wildfire. "That poison," Vraxen hissed, "kills in minutes." The messenger nodded, trembling. "It's spreading through the lower wings, the servants, the hatchlings. They're already dying." Without hesitation, Elias stepped forward. "Release me," he said. "I can neutralize it. I've seen that toxin before," Vraxen snarled. "You expect us to trust you again?" The Empress rose, her voice fierce. "Do it!" The guards hesitated, confused. "Now!" she roared, and the chains fell away. Elias grabbed his broken case, pulling out a small vial of shimmering silver liquid. "I'll need the purification tanks and a clean chamber," he said. Already moving, the Empress followed him. Ignoring the protests of her generals, through the golden corridors they ran, the air thick with smoke and panic. Dragons lay writhing on the floor, their scales turning dark from the spreading toxin. Elias dropped to his knees beside the first victim, his hands glowing blue once more. He mixed the silver serum into a tube and injected it directly under the dragon's scale. The glow spread instantly and the breathing slowed, then steadied. "It works," he whispered. "But not for long. I'll need to create more." Hours passed in a blur. Elias worked until his hands bled, mixing chemicals, distilling energy, burning through every drop of his serum. The Empress stayed by his side. Refusing to leave, she helped carry victims, her wings shielding the weak from collapsing ceilings. When the supply ran out, he turned to her, breathless. "I need a live sample of the toxin to finish the cure," he said. She reached for a flask, but he stopped her hand. "No," he said. "It's too dangerous and one drop can kill." Without hesitation, Elias pressed the flask to his own arm, letting the venom sting his skin. The Empress gasped, "What are you doing?" He grimaced as the black veins spread across his hand. "I can't fix what I don't understand," he said through clenched teeth. The Empress's claws trembled, fire flaring in her throat. "You'll die." He looked up at her, his voice weak but steady. "Then I'll die healing something worth saving." He fell to his knees, fevered and pale, mixing the antidote even as his body convulsed. The Empress caught him before he hit the ground. "Foolish human," she whispered, tears glinting beneath her golden lashes. "You risk your life for mine, for my people, and still they doubt you." He smiled faintly, his breath shallow. "Maybe. One day they won't." With the last of his strength, he poured the serum into the main water channel. A surge of silver light rippled through the pipes, spreading through the wells, the fountains, the air. Moments later, the cries of pain faded. The poison had been neutralized. The dragons began to stir, breathing again, their scales bright once more. And there, in the midst of it all, the human collapsed, unconscious but alive. The Empress held him close, her claws shaking. For the first time in her reign, she did not care who saw her tears. She looked down at him, whispering, "You've given everything, and you never asked for anything in return." Her fire dimmed, replaced by something purer, something she could not name, and in that silence, the dragons who had once called him a liar now bowed their heads. For they saw not a spy, not a servant, but a savior. The human doctor who had risked his life to save the empire that once called him an enemy. As dawn broke over the burned mountains, the Empress whispered to the sky, "If he lives," she said, "then the stars still have mercy left for us all." And somewhere deep within the palace, beneath the quiet hum of healing light, Elias Crane's heart beat weakly, though slow, steady, unbroken. A heartbeat that had changed the fate of dragons forever. The sun rose over the Dragon Empire with a light that seemed new. Golden rays spilled across the mountains, touching the palace towers that had once been blackened by war. But inside those shining halls, silence ruled for 3 long days. The human doctor had not awakened. His body lay still on the great marble bed in the Empress's own chamber, the place where no mortal had ever been allowed. Dragons from across the empire brought gifts, medicines, prayers, even rare phoenix feathers, yet none could stir him. None could restore the man who had saved their ruler's life. The Empress Sarathia had not left his side. She sat upon the floor beside his bed, her mighty form bent low, her wings wrapped around him like a shield. She had faced armadas, storms, and gods, but never had she faced fear like this. The fear of losing one life. Every few hours she reached out, touching his wrist with a trembling claw. Each faint heartbeat felt like a whisper from the stars. "He still fights," she would murmur to herself. "He still fights." Outside, her court grew restless. Lord Vraxen returned, demanding an audience. "Majesty," he said, his voice sharp with unease, "the people whisper that the human has bewitched you, that your tears for him are a weakness." The Empress's eyes lifted slowly, glowing like molten suns. "Do you call mercy weakness?" she asked, her voice deadly calm. "I call it danger," Vraxen said. "The Empire was forged in flame, not pity. We cannot let one soft-hearted creature rewrite our fate." Sarathia rose, towering over him, her claws sparking against the stone. "You speak of fate as if you've ever changed it," she said coldly. "That human did what our entire race could not. He saved us from poison, from death. From ourselves?" Vraxen bowed his head, trembling. "And yet he is human." "Then perhaps humanity," she said softly, "is what our kind has been missing." She dismissed him with a flick of her tail, the hall shaking as the doors slammed shut behind him. When she turned back to Elias, her heart ached. His pale face was peaceful but too still. The gentle rise and fall of his chest slowed with each passing hour. Dragons heal through fire, through fury, through wills, but humans, they fade quietly, and the thought of that silence breaking him tore something inside her. She called for her best alchemists, her priests, her healers, every creature of knowledge in her empire. They came bearing runes and relics, potions and chants, but none could bridge the fragile line between his world and hers. At last, one ancient dragon bowed before her throne and said softly, "There is a forbidden way, Majesty, a joining ritual between flame and breath. It can bind life to life, but it was outlawed ages ago, for the one who gives burns their essence away." Her golden eyes shone with sudden purpose. "Show me," she said. They begged her not to. But her decision was made. That night, when the moons hung low and red, the Empress entered his chamber alone. She knelt beside him, her mighty frame trembling. He looked so small in her vast bed, so fragile yet so unyielding even in stillness. She placed a clawed hand over his chest and whispered, "You gave me your light, Elias Crane. Now I return it." The ritual flame burned blue, not the fire of destruction, but of life. It curled from her palm, soft and shimmering, seeping into his chest. She felt her own heart shudder as the energy left her veins. The fire that had once destroyed fleets now bent itself to heal a single human. Her wings dimmed, her scales dulled, but she didn't stop. She could feel his heart struggling. Faint and far, "Come back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You are not done teaching me how to live." And then, for the first time in days, his chest rose sharply. His breath returned, shallow but real. The Empress fell forward, her strength nearly gone, tears falling freely. The blue flame faded, leaving only the steady sound of his breathing. She smiled weakly, her body trembling with exhaustion. "Welcome back, Doctor," she whispered. "You stubborn fool." When Elias opened his eyes, dawn was breaking again. He blinked, confused, staring up at the massive form beside him. "Did I?" he began weakly. "You almost did," she said, her voice soft but rough with emotion. "But not while I still breathe." He sat up slowly, realizing how pale she looked. Her scales had lost their golden glow, dimmed to the color of ember ash. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I shared my fire," she said. "A fair exchange for the life you gave me." He stared at her, his throat tight. "That could have killed you." She smiled faintly. "It didn't." Outside, news spread like wildfire, and the Empress had given her flame to a human, and the Empire trembled with awe. When she appeared before her people again, she was not the blinding inferno they remembered. She was gentler, her fire dimmer, but her presence stronger than ever. She stood upon the high balcony, the wind carrying her words across the Empire. "My people," she said, her voice echoing over the mountains, "the human you feared has saved us more than once. He healed our wounds, ended our poison, and taught me something no war ever did. That mercy does not weaken fire, it tempers it." She turned and, before the eyes of her entire court, she did the unthinkable. The Dragon Empress, ruler of flame, knelt before the human doctor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sound like thunder. "Rise, my Empress," Elias whispered in shock, but she only shook her head. "No," she said. "The stars themselves must see what pride blinded me from. You are not beneath us, Elias Crane. You are proof that even the smallest spark of compassion can light a dying world." Her words swept across the Empire like a storm of light. From that day on, no human was ever hunted again within dragon space. A new pact was signed, forged not with blood, but with healing. They called it the Oath of Flame and Breath. And legends spread of the day the Dragon Empress knelt, not in defeat but in gratitude, not to a conqueror but to a healer. In the quiet after the ceremony, Elias stood beside her on the balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky in gold and red. "You've changed your world," he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly. "No," she whispered. "We changed it." And as the light touched them both, human and dragon, the burned sky above the Empire began to heal. A new dawn was born, not from conquest, but from compassion, and among the stars, the legend of the human doctor and the Dragon Empress would never fade. For they had proven together that mercy burns brighter than fire,